Okay, so I have to tell you that I'm kind of an Instagram educator now. I've hit on Instagram, and if you're not doing that, you should. And I encountered Don Massey through Instagram. So we met today for the first time, and I'm so excited and I feel so honored to be able to introduce him today. So I'm just going to read a very short bio and then pass it on to Don. Don Massey's earliest art-related memory is getting in trouble for drawing on one of the mint green walls in the family room with a bright red crayon. Since then, his love for the language of visual art has never waned. Don has taught at Zamorano Fine Arts Academy, a very large and diverse public elementary school in San Diego since 2001. He's a firm believer in the importance of introducing his students to the work and processes of artists working in today's world. He has shared these views as a contributing editor for Arts and Activities, where his Alive and Kicking series ran on a regular basis. Don celebrates the work of his school community on his blog, shinebrightzamorano.com. Is it Zamorano or Zamorano? Zamorano.com. In 2018, he was recognized with both the California Elementary Art Educator Award and the Pacific Region Elementary Art Educator Awards. When he is not in the classroom, you can often find him with a piece of chalk or charcoal in his hand, drawing out in the street or in the safety of his own living room. So, without further ado, welcome Don Massey.
There we go. So I'm really looking forward to an exciting day. This is a really awesome experience that you all have set up at Azusa Pacific, and I'm glad and humbled to be a part of it. So thank you for putting this on. So like Aaron was saying, I do have a contemporary focus in my elementary school curriculum. Before I get into the contemporary crux of it today, I'd like to touch upon like my goals in the curriculum. So I feel, and my friend over there touched upon it briefly, as far as I feel that my students need to feel valued and respected while growing as critical and creative thinkers. We need to love them. We need to take care of them. They need to be respected in our curriculum. My students need to gain experience with a wide range of materials, styles, and approaches in my curriculum. Students develop technical and creative skills necessary to communicate their ideas through visual art. And my students develop stamina, perseverance through the creative design process. So I use contemporary art in my curriculum to basically hit on all of these elements throughout my work with the students. So backtracking a little bit, when I first started teaching in 2001 down at Zamorano in San Diego, I was using the standard art periodicals as reference, Art in America, Art Forum, Arts and Activities, things like that. My reliance on my art history textbooks and knowledge of contemporary art. But the contemporary art that I was most familiar with was stuff that had happened 40, 50 years ago, things that you see in the textbooks in your survey art history classes. And I realized that this wasn't doing a service to my students. It's a very diverse school. Most of the artists that I was sharing were older white men, right? And that's not who I'm teaching, right? They're not present in that curriculum. So, like I said before, I'm not very tech savvy, or especially back then. And our art department got a little Bubble Mac. And I started to peruse it and check it out on a daily basis after school. And I came across this blog called Dear Ada. That's a little picture of it right there. And it really opened up my eyes to the amount of artwork, contemporary artwork that's being made in the present day. As far as the diversity that's out there, the young artists that are producing, back then I was in my early 30s, and seeing artists that were in their 20s and their 30s producing and having their work out there made me realize that stuff was so much more relevant to my students, that it can engage me and it can engage my students more in the curriculum. And this was pre-Instagram, like Erin had mentioned Instagram, and she had her little links and her what do you call those? when she cited, and that would kind of be like looking and exploring via like hashtags. Currently on Instagram, I would go down one wormhole after another and find more and more and more artists that I could bring into my curriculum. All right, so that's kind of like where it all started. So as far as the contemporary focus goes, it's really all about engagement, getting that hook for your students. It's trying to engage your students, finding things that are relevant for them, but also selfishly, things that you're really excited about. Because if you don't have a passion for what you're sharing in your curriculum, your kids aren't going to be engaged. They're just going to sit back and chill, right? You want to make sure that they are as focused and engaged as possible. So you want to make yourself that way too. An example of this, just really briefly, is Tom Pastrano. He's a Bay Area designer and illustrator, and using his work to touch upon abstraction and figuration, even with kids as young as kindergarten. Looking at the Sesame Street characters, thinking about how they could break them up and rearrange it and look at things in a different way. So you could see a couple actually third grade examples over there. And it was really interesting when doing the Sesame Street images, because the kids honestly didn't really know who they were. Right? Which I was like, oh, come on, this is Bert and Ernie, right? But they didn't see it. I have one of Elmo, and they're like, oh, okay, well, I got Elmo. And then the image with all of the abstractions in there, that was actually from Tennessee Art Academy last summer. So those are art teacher approaches to a similar process. So even though I am teaching elementary school, a lot of the curriculum can be scaled up and down depending on the audience, depending on the amount of choice and constraints that you want to offer your students. So as far as engagement go, it's about making connections, right? Making connections with your students, making things relevant for them. So when you are purposefully looking at contemporary artists to include in your curriculum, some things to think about are making sure, tying into art careers and student interests, like video games. Are there artists out there who are looking at gaming as inspiration, that you can incorporate into your curriculum? Like you've got the Greg Galinsky skateboard decks up there. Are there apparel designers? Are there skateboard designers? Are there jewelry makers that you can bring in? Graffiti artists, mural artists, things like that, where you're looking at what the students are looking at and starting to include that in your curriculum. Making sure that the contemporary artists that you're using are representative of your community, so it's not all white guys. If you're teaching at a school that is, Filipino, Mexican, African American, you want to make sure that you bring artists in that represent your student population. You want your kids to see themselves in the artwork, so they get more engaged and more involved. Even if you have a contemporary art focus in your curriculum, you can connect it to art history, right? You can make it relevant. This isn't just 100% or nothing. There's definitely middle roads that you can use contemporary art with. For example, like the skateboard decks that I pointed out, you could look at those and talk about present day abstraction and then kind of go back in art history and make connections to address art history. Or you could look at some Picasso abstractions from the past and work your way forward. Right? So you can kind of go back and forth with art history and contemporary art in your curriculum. And the big thing is just making the content more real and relevant for your students. When your students are seeing real living artists using the content and the elements that they're using and experimenting in class, it makes it so much more relevant. It makes it really click for them, and they become more engaged with it. Instead of looking at something, from like 200 years in the past, 100 years in the past, there's that distance there, and it's not going to be as relevant, right? So just making sure that you're bringing it to life. You're going to see more engagement in it. Couple examples. We have Derek Adams did his whole My Channel series. So, using symbols on their TV sets to relay things that are important to them as far as this third grade project goes. Over on the right there is a third grade portrait painting that's inspired by Gloria Muriel, who spends time on both sides of the border. My school is 15 minutes from the Mexican border, and it's great to incorporate an artist that goes back and forth between there to really resonate with the students. One of the other really cool things about introducing your students to contemporary art is that you can reach out and connect with the artists. If they have a website or if they have an Instagram, or even if they just have an email address and you are active on social media or you blog, or even if you don't do those things, completely, you can reach out and the artist will often engage with the students or engage with you as the teacher. And when the students hear that, Tom Pastrano, reached out and said you did an awesome job with these abstractions, right? It just spikes the engagement. And it just, again, makes it so much more relevant for us and for your students. My students will sometimes write questions to the artist and the artist will respond, right? And so they think it's really thrilling that the artist is actually taking the time to look at their artwork and write back and engage with them, again, making it much more alive. And sometimes even the artist will send free stuff, right? So in this case, you've got Tom Pastrano and a design team, lab partners, did the sun image right there, where they will send stickers, they'll send posters, they'll send socks, they'll send t-shirts, anything like that. And you can use those items to boost engagement with your curriculum as well. I use them often for rewards. I reward students for excellent citizenship and excellent perseverance and craftsmanship, creativity in their work. Couple other examples. A couple years ago, I did a project inspired by Lisa Congdon, and she, wrote about it on her blog. So we could look at that in class, and the students could see their artwork up there, see what she wrote about it. Again, making it really engaging. As far as Instagram goes, reaching out, tagging the artists that you're focusing on, and they'll give us comments. Little House Inc. there, Hannah Grundam is a San Diego-based artist, but when they like it, like Derek Adams did in that lower picture, again, it makes the kids really excited that the artists are actually looking at our artwork. Again, making that connection stronger. Contemporary art is awesome, right? I really think you should incorporate it into your curriculum. But one of the things you want to be aware of is you want to provide your students time to play in your class. You don't want to have 30 of the same exact thing. You want to make sure if you're looking at these contemporary pieces, they're not just copying the artwork, because then there's no development of the student voice in those pieces. So I make sure to, if we're looking at, let's say, like the sculptural reliefs of Kimmy Cantrell, that they start with practice. They experiment on sketch paper to try out different ideas so that they're not just duplicating Kimmy's work. They're taking some of his vocabulary and making it more personal to them. Even if the artwork doesn't look a lot like his at the end, they're still bringing some of that vocabulary into their artwork. Down at the bottom there is a series of drawings that the fifth graders did based on Project Backboard. And Project Backboard is an organization that's in Los Angeles. And they work with communities around the country and around the world to revitalize community areas. So we looked at some of the basketball courts that they have done with artists around the world. And then it was the students' turn. If you could design a court for Zamorano, what would it look like? And so they were able to really branch out and try a lot of different ideas. And so again, you're not looking at the same thing over and over, right? Copying or direct instruction definitely has, its moments in curriculum. But I think as far as developing that student voice, you want to make sure that you push away from that a good bit. A couple other examples of just kind of choice in these artworks. You're looking at the Mark Conlon inspired images on the left-hand side. We looked at kind of this discovery series of illustrations that he did. And then the students basically focused on positive and negative. But as far as the content involved, that was totally up to them. What would they discover? So you've got like the Jurassic Park and Minecraft one right there, which I really love. You know, right? You've got a lot of detail, and it's a really, you know, wonderful contrast in style between the realistic, you know, drawing of the dinosaurs and the Minecraft, you know, the cubists in there. You've got the rescue scene. You've got like the Harry Potter, you know, with the Patronus. You know, so there was a whole lot of wonderful variety in there, and they're still touching upon the, you know, the core elements that I was looking for in the project. I mentioned Lisa Congdon earlier, and my second graders looked at an illustration of hers that had an animal and geometric shapes in it. But they made all of the decisions as far as like the background color, the color of the characters, the types of geometric shapes, the character itself. Again, so there's, you know, they get to express themselves. They're not just worried about making it look like Mr. Masse's example, or making it, you know, worried about making it look exactly like Lisa Congdon's piece. You can even take this with kindergarten age students too. The images in the lower right corner there were inspired by Mo Willems, who does the Pigeon books, Knuffle Bunny. He did a whole series of those too. So I'll read a lot of books to my kindergartners, engage them with the illustration and the narrative, and then after that, instead of just, you know, making 30 different Knuffle Bunnies, they chose a toy or a stuffy that was important to them. So they practiced it, they tried it out, they played, and then they took their drawing and made it into the final version. The flip side of that, or the flip side, right, are the constraints. I'm talking a lot about choice and giving students the opportunity to play, but I feel that these design constraints are really important, one, in terms of measuring content understanding, but also to provide like a real world interaction, you know, making them start to be aware of how things are going to go later in life as far as careers go. Like this project based on Sony's work, a Brooklyn illustrator, they were required to have a multi-panel image, use primary colors, and then create a theme. Right? And so they all had to do that. But when they have those constraints, it gives them something to kind of push against, work against. And you're going to find constraints really in any career that you go into. You know, if you're a pro athlete, you've got the constraints of the soccer field, right? Or the football field, right? If you're going to be a designer, you may have budgetary constraints. You may have, you know, the constraints that your client has on the design. So I think, you know, this is a real world skill that you're developing in your students by having them play up against these constraints. And I find that it makes things less frustrating for them too, and a lot of times, because if you give them complete and open choice, right, they're not sure where to start. If you kind of set these boundaries for them to work within, I think they have a lot more room to kind of explore and kind of push those boundaries. So those are fifth grade examples, and then you've got a first grade approach too, where they do look similar. There's not as much choice involved in them, but we looked at a San Diego artist. His name is Philip Sang, and he did a playground take on Pete Mondrian, art history, contemporary connection. And they were required to make their jungle gym with verticals and horizontals, and then, you know, rectangles, and include different feelings or expressions. So it's a lesson on line, but also on feeling too. And I think this Philip Sang, he really makes Mondrian approachable. If you try and show like Mondrian pieces to first graders, right, there's not going to be a whole lot of engagement there. But here, you take like a humorous spin on it, and the kids get excited about it. Yeah, we're making verticals, we're making horizontals, we're making silly faces. And I think it really just ups the ante and engagement in the classroom. A couple other examples of constraints. My fifth graders designed 3D prints. They look at an artist named, a sculptor named Rachel Beach. And the main constraint in the 3D designs is they need to show symmetry, and they need to have a variety of line thicknesses. So if you look at each one of them, each of those 3D print designs is different, but they're all maintaining, they're all hitting, the requirements in there, right? But there's a lot of variety within that. My second graders do shrink ink jewelry. And so we look at Erin Inglis, and so we look at her work, we see how she repeats elements in there, how she uses analogous colors, and then they are free to explore their design within those constraints. So they needed to repeat a shape, and they needed to use a color family, analogous colors. And again, there's a great amount of variety in there. Now, within this, and within my curriculum, I talked about at the very beginning, exposing your students to a range of mark making, a range of approaches to artwork. And I really kind of push and pull between abstraction and figurative artwork with my students. And I do this because it gives them a better sense of the range of things that they can do with a particular medium or a particular approach. In this case, the fourth graders looked at an artist, Britta Lynn, and she does like these Zentangle kind of patterned, really patterned and rich landscapes. So we did something that was inspired by San Diego symbols, San Diego landmarks. They had images to look at, and they created their own compositions based on those. And then the next week they came back and they used that same vocabulary. They were continuing to use contour line. They were continuing to use pattern. They were continuing to use texture, overlapping. But the artwork looks totally different. So I really kind of push that with all of my kids so that you can see, if you're using chalk pastels, if you're using colored pencils, there's so much that you can do with it. It doesn't have to be abstract all the time. It doesn't have to be realistic all the time. There's a whole rich world to experiment with as far as those materials go. Another example of that, I mentioned chalk pastels. My fourth graders, again, looked at the work of Mo Brooker, who's a Philadelphia abstractionist, who is very inspired by instrumental jazz music. And so the first week we were together, we focused on kind of color theory, talking about mixing secondaries from primaries, talking about warms and cools, different textures. And then the next week we came back and we did these landscapes that are inspired by San Diego artist Aaron Chang. And the images come from our playground, right? So they're things, Aaron is like a surf photographer, but not everybody in my school gets to the beach. So we chose something that they could focus on and that was part of their daily fabric. So they looked at the playground. So again, talking about that range in the artwork. Even with kinders, looking at the artwork of Wosene, Worke, Kosrof, 1 week creating kind of name abstractions, looking at creating tints, creating secondary colors, talking about smooth and rough. And then the next week looking at a San Diego artist who focuses on cacti and succulents. So again, talking about that range, even on this very young level. So as far as, giving your students an opportunity to play, an opportunity to incorporate their student voices into the work. I think it's really important that you give your students chances to express themselves, talk about it, share about it, communicate with it, whether it's in writing, whether it's verbally. I think that builds a much better understanding of the vocabulary that you're introducing to them. They're starting to take ownership of it when they do that. And you can do this at various points in the process. It could be, midpoint between the sketches and the final work. Why are you choosing to choose one sketch over the other? What's your reasoning there? It could be afterwards, where again, you're asking them certain questions and they've got to identify. And you could scaffold this for any number of grade levels too. I really encourage my students to use because statements. They can't really be wrong if they cite evidence from their artwork, right? So if you chose one sketch over the other, just don't tell me it's cool, right? Or it's awesome, right? You've got to tell me why. What's the evidence in the artwork that you're pulling from, that you're gaining that information from? right? And I think over time, that gives them a better idea of, how to think about their artwork. It really starts to inform their design and creative process. So this may take the form, like the kindergartners at the beginning of the year aren't writing sentences, right? But you could set up frames for them where we kind of, with these abstractions that we did, they were identifying types of lines. It could be kind of a collective thing that you do with them, and then give them a list of words and they can fill in the blanks. Or it could be something that's a little bit more involved, like the third grade images right here, that were inspired by California printmaker Joseph Worke. So these are some of the finished designs over on the left-hand side, and you can get a sense of the process like in the classroom, where we looked at Joseph's work, we identified certain things that he uses in terms of line and overlapping and texture and pattern. I give them like images of his to look at, but again, they're not copying it. They're taking his images and kind of mashing them up, incorporating things from our San Diego landscape that they want to include. And then what they do is, identify which one they like more. Like that horizontal one, I want to do this one because it's wide and it has a lot of space to draw in. That's perfect. It gave me the what and the why, right? And again, you can see there's a lot of variety in the final results there. I'm big on collaboration in my curriculum as well. I feel like, again, it encourages that development of social skills that they're going to need in any career path that they go in. It could be something where it's partner work. It could be something where it's teams of 3 and 4. But these concepts of teamwork and sharing, compromise, all of those things that go into modern society and making us work, they're starting to develop skills in there where it's not just about them. Now they've got to work with another voice. This is a drawing activity that I do inspired by Heather Hansen, and she's kind of like a performer, a dancer. This is a little bit different because it's more of a nonverbal collaboration where the students sit across from one another and it's kind of like a dance. Well, I'm not a good dancer, but you have, somebody's leading and then they follow. So this exercise is exercise in like deep reading too, because it's a pretty wild project to do with your students, because it's, when you think about it, they're mirroring one another, but they're looking at somebody across from them. First of all, they're drawing with both hands, so that's totally different. And then they're looking at their partner draw something upside down, and then they have to flip it, and they have to draw it right side. So there's a whole lot going on in this collaborative experience specifically. But it could take many forms. We looked at Chinese artist Haisu Yu, and her relief sculptures that you can see up at the top there, you remind me of like the refrigerator letter magnets that you would play with as a kid. And teams of 3 or 4 worked with Legos to create kind of like a temporary sculptural installation where they had to focus on respecting each other's opinions. They have to speak, they have to listen, they have to do all that compromising in there in order to create the final product. I'm big on, I said I'm not that tech savvy, but I'm learning on the fly. And I really love using digital art in my curriculum to encourage collaboration. I like the idea of taking, like digital technology and social media has a way of it brings people together, but it also separates us as far as like the development of social skills. So I like the idea of putting one iPad in between 2 people, 2 students, and have them compromise and work together. So it's not just looking at a screen like this, right? Now they've got to turn to one another and have a dialogue and conversation that you wouldn't normally have as far as like digital media goes. And I like the fact that since they are using new apps and, like new technology with one another, they're taking more ownership of the learning because they're really teaching one another. If one partner has a problem, the other partner can help them out, right? So they're becoming a teacher in this aspect as well. So we've got some digital mandalas on the left, and they were inspired by a Japanese pufferfish. The male Japanese pufferfish who creates sand mandalas to attract a mate, right? Nice conversation to have with first graders, right? but and so we looked at those. We talked about thick and thin, and then they started to experiment with the app in order to create it. And so, they've got symmetry in there. I asked them to have dark, medium, and light, and I asked them to have thick, medium, and thin, and there was a lot of variety with those. The images that you're looking at on the right-hand side are kindergarten pixelated characters. So we looked at an artist named Mike Whitting who creates these kind of pixelated sculptures. There was a great exhibit at the Denver Botanical Garden last year that I saw. And so they're using this block app in order to create these. And this especially is pretty interesting because you have some of the kids, I'm all for figurative and abstraction, and it's really interesting how some of the kids are just dropping blocks in wherever to create this abstract composition. And then you have kids with this innate spatial awareness that as they drop blocks in, they're creating characters that look very realistic. It's really interesting to see the range of approaches to a project like that. My fourth graders experiment with an app called Morphe, which is really awesome if anybody hasn't heard of it yet. And we look at the artwork of Rachel Beach. So my fifth graders look at her work too, but they create the actual 3D prints. And my fourth graders work together in order to create this 3D model in the app. And then it's pretty neat because then they hit an AR button and it combines with the camera on the iPad. So it creates these, virtual sculptures. And so you could talk about point of view and perspective and all sorts of things when you approach this. And the engagement, any of these iPad projects or digital projects, it's through the roof. I'll have like the iPad sitting out and like they'll come in and they'll be like, is it iPad day? Right? It's like, like, yeah, right? So, I do one unit per grade with them. The fifth graders do more. And the other thing too is that it's really interesting as far as how delete and undo are really powerful. They reduce a lot of stress. Whereas, if you're working on a drawing or a painting and you make a wrong mark, you have to put white paint over it. You have to erase it. And there's a real tightening up that happens in some students. But when you have the digital work in front of them and they hit undo, I don't like that layer. I'm going to delete it. It's just like, oh. And I find that students are more willing to take chances, take risks with the designs because it's free. They don't have to worry about like the preciousness of the material, right? So I find that really fascinating. The other thing with the digital media itself too is kids that struggle with fine motor, you're giving them a chance to succeed with the art making processes too. And if they don't have the capabilities of something, digital media can be a great equalizer and give other kids, areas to shine too. And it makes, as far as, I share iPads with them, and it makes the technology much more manageable to handle, but not everybody has that. The app is called Morphe. So I talked about range. As far as abstraction and figuration, I also like to you can explore traditional and digital too. So one week, my third graders created these mixed media symmetrical abstractions. We talked about layering of space. We talked about overlapping. And the next week, they came in and they created these double exposure photographs. So again, they're using similar vocabulary, but the artworks look completely different. Again, so they could see how they can use that vocabulary in different ways and speak about artwork that looks a lot different. I've never really experimented with the double exposures until this year. I love them. The kids really took off with them. And you can flip that. You can go from digital to traditional in your curriculum as well. So my fifth graders, every year the fifth graders at my school, we do a fifth grade legacy mural for the past 10 years. And this year, we do the murals, and most of the time it's me coming up with the design and the kids are articulating them. But when we looked at the work of LaQuena MacGyver this year, who creates these really bold graphic murals with these messages of positivity in them, when they did this digital mural project, I let them know we're going to choose one of these as the fifth grade legacy mural this year. right? So there was a lot of engagement as far as that goes. But they used an app called Assembly, which is a great design collage app that you can get. And they created a lot of great mural designs. So you've got respect others, you've got stay awesome, you've got inspirational message. I love it. That was good, right? And so after that, we looked at some of them, and then we kind of narrowed it down to a few. And this is the one that we ran with, Believe in Yourself. So the two kids on the ladders right there are the two artists that designed it. So they were my co-artists for the week, where we were out there drawing and doing the outlining and everything. And then all 180 fifth graders participated in the painting. So they're leaving a positive mark on the school, something to really enliven the school community. Which leads me to community, because I think with contemporary art, you can use it to really address making a positive community element in your school too. I think these community building exercises are really important to do at your school. One of the ways that we do it, we have the permanent murals at the end of the year, but every year at the beginning of the year, we start with a temporary paper quilt. It's a collaborative quilt. Basically, everybody from second grade through fifth, so about 900 students participate, and everybody basically creates like some kind of motif for a quilt square. There's choice and constraints involved in that, but it's a great way to celebrate unity and variety in art, but also unity and diversity in your school community, kind of making them aware of those things. And this is an artwork that can go up really quick. We do it the first week of school, we hang it the second, and then it's in your auditorium for assemblies for however long you want to keep it up. But it's a really bold, positive statement right off the bat to celebrate your school in the beginning of the year. Just another example, we're looking at LA-based textile designer Latifa Safir and St. Louis-based textile maker Sylvia Suiters. Right? And then what you can do with it is you can really use social media to share it, send it to your district. You know, you can send it out to, other people so they can see what you're doing. And then you've got community within the school, but one of the things that I've started to really focus on is interacting with our artist community in San Diego, reaching out. So you can get people, I was talking about how artists can give feedback online. If you start to engage your local art community, one of the really neat things is they can actually come into the school. And I talked about making things look more real before. I mean, that takes it to the highest level where they're in there engaging with the students. So it could be like an artist visit like Monty Montgomery did right there. And these are artists that we include in the curriculum. So the students are familiar with their work, and they'll come in, they'll do an artist talk, they'll look at student artwork. And I started to focus on mural artists in particular, and I found that the mural artist community in San Diego is really, really giving. They love working with the community. Kind of makes sense. They're public artists, right? So they're kind of engaging in what they do no matter what. And Monty came in, and first graders and fourth graders looked at his work, and he came in for a week, and they created that mural that you see down at the bottom together. So it beautifies our campus, and it makes the content, again, more real. A couple years ago, I did a project based on Santos Orellana, and students, when we did the project, I posted about it, I shared it online, and he has a gallery in San Diego, and I went and visited him. I was like, hey, we did a project based on your work. He's like, yeah, it's really cool. Do you have a wall? I was like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, I can paint a mural. I was like, Santos, I don't have any money. He's like, no, that's okay, I'll do it. Right? So he got like Oops paint from Home Depot and spray paint, and he jammed all week, and students could come by. He worked with some students, fifth graders that you see there. I did a project that week that was inspired by his work with second graders. So it was really cool because we started the project, then we were able to take a break, look at how Santos was applying what we were learning about right there at school, and then come back in and finish the artwork. right? So it just resonated. It made everything just so exciting. This year, I got a grant to have 2 more mural artists come in. Max Moses over here on the left, and Gloria Mural, I mentioned her earlier, on the right-hand side. And so they came in, the students did artwork based on their work, and then they came in and beautified our campus. And so these experiences are really awesome because kids see the creative decisions being made by the artist in real time, which is just amazing. And we'll have kids out at recess, and they would just, you can see how they're all lined up there, just quietly watching and observing the artist. It's just a wonderful experience. It's like, oh, I wish I could be out there like that all day, So it was really, really wonderful to see. Muriel, Muriel. And if you do artwork, bring that into the curriculum. Right? I mean, it just it makes it so much more active. So I create these large-scale chalk mandalas on the street in public places. And so I shared some of those with my students, some 3rd graders, and then we went out and we gave it a try. Right? So they see what you do. It makes you more real. You're not just the teacher, but you're active in art making, and they get to see what you do and then try it out too. Again, not copying it, but taking off on their own way. Right. So just really quick, some contemporary resources for you. These are all websites. Colossal Art and Design is fantastic. They've got such a large collection online. The Jealous Curator, she focuses on a lot of paintings, contemporary paintings being made. Dear Ada, although she's no longer blogging, she has an active Tumblr that she consistently updates. Brown Paper Bag, which focuses more on illustration. I love to incorporate a lot of illustration in there. And then Arrested Motion is another one, another good resource. As far as other teachers, if you're active on social media, Nick Hahn, Minnie Matisse has really incorporated some interesting fibers and wearable artists into her curriculum this year. Jordan DeWild really makes contemporary art. He looks at art and activism in his curriculum and brings that in. Sarah Pullman, who used to teach in LA, she's now over in Brooklyn, looks at a lot of cool street art and works with different medias and techniques with her kids. Kendra Silby in Brooklyn there does a lot of art and activism, right? So art and the purpose of art in her curriculum. And then Melissa Mastriola, who was in charge of a lot of stuff going on in Boston this year at the NAEA, and she does a lot with contemporary art too. Contemporary resources for social media. If you just are on Instagram and you hashtag contemporary art, all right, you're going to get a gazillion, all right, images to scroll through. You can narrow your focus. It could be like California contemporary art. It's going to get a little smaller. Your town or city, all right? So I look up a lot of San Diego, right? I looked up LA art or artist, and there was 500,000 images, right? I looked up Pasadena, there was 1,000. Right? So it's interesting. You can kind of limit your focus or you can broaden it depending on what you want. K-12 Art Chat, they don't necessarily focus on contemporary art all the time, right? But they are a great resource on Twitter and Instagram. Laura and Matt Grunler, who are here today. If you have a question, you could use that hashtag. They also have the app, what is that? K-12 Art Chat, right? And you can post that out to teachers across the country, and you can get a lot of feedback very immediately. It's a very giving, very generous community that they fostered. So that's another place that you can look at. All right. So if you use contemporary art, you've got engagement, enthusiasm, and self-esteem. They're all going to go up, up, up. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Teaching is such a demanding part of our lives. How do you refuel? How do you keep yourself full of energy, active, and
I like to get out in nature. Hikes and camping is big with me and my family. We'll go up to the mountains. We'll go up to Joshua Tree. We'll go to the desert, Borrego, or elsewhere. And I think it's really important to nurture your creative stuff by, I'm drawing all the time. whether it's large scale, whether it's small scale. But I'm always playing just to kind of keep active. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in kind of, you talked about how you started. Like, what was your school like when you started there and your position as a teacher? And I mean, we see what it's like now.
Yeah.
But like, how has that ripple effect happened, and also like within the district that you work? Like, do you find that you have become like that go-to guy?
In some ways, as far as being like a go-to as far as the district, with the mural program that we do, the district has seen the positive impact that has on our community. So this year, they asked me to do a workshop for schools that were interested in starting a mural program. They actually offered like a $400 stipend for anybody that came. So it's really neat to kind of see what we're doing at our school site start to be rippled out district-wide. It's pretty awesome. When I first started at Zamorano, it was a bit different. They had one full-time art teacher. We were bigger then. It was 1,400 kids. And his schedule was so weird. It was like he met with the class from 8 to 9, and then he took like a half-hour break. And then it was like another hour that he taught, and then it was like an hour lunch. And like the amount of students that he saw was like, he wasn't making a dent. And I came on as an artist in residence, and there was me, there was somebody who did ceramics, and we have a dark room. So we had somebody doing photography. And the people that were in those positions started to enliven the school more. And then the art teacher retired, and I was able to slide in. And we actually got more funding for, we were a magnet school for a long time, and so we were able to bring a couple other people on. We no longer have that. The district said, you can keep the focus, you just need to figure out how to do it, right? But our community they'll raise $60,000 a year. Keep in mind, this is a Title I school. In order to keep, that's our art supply budget, and it's 2 artists in residence. So somebody that does fashion with kids, somebody that does photography and ceramics too. So that kind
You
of...
totally converted that to like make this is a priority because of what
Yeah, because and the community sees what we do, and they buy in. They're like, this is awesome, right? Arts education is important. So we have consistently had that community buy-in, and it's wonderful. It's a great place to be. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Given like the budget restrictions that you may experience, do you have like local supply stores, or is there a way that you kind of try to get them to donate things? Or
The school community? Well, I mean, they put so much. I mean, we have a $10,000 budget, and that's for 4 of us, to serve 1,400 students. That's not bad. So I don't really seek donations other than that from the school community because they give so much already. If I need to supplement stuff, I'm doing like GoFundMe or Donors Choose or things like that. So I'm not taxing the community anymore. I'm seeking out other ways to kind of, bring in revenue for my program. Yeah. Anybody else? I think we're out of time. Cool. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, thank you.